Welcome to Wine and Cheesed, the New Civil Liberties Alliance's occasional interview show where we talk to folks who have been talking about controversial subjects, and we give them a platform to, we don't whine about cancel culture, but we give them a platform to maybe talk about some of those controversial subjects in a civil way. We like to provide a place to discuss topics that have gotten people boycotted or shunned for no good reason, and we invite them here to talk about the ideas that they want to convey. If this is your first time tuning in to Wine and Cheese, then grab a glass of wine and enjoy decanting with the deplatform and uncorking the canceled. Today's guest of honor on Wine and Cheese is Paula Scanlan. Paula graduated from the University of Pennsylvania in 2022, where she was a swimmer and teammate of Lia Thomas, formerly known as Will Thomas, a biologically male transgender athlete who switched from competing for UPenn's men's swimming team to competing on behalf of the women's swimming team, and began using the women's locker room despite continuing to possess the physical attributes of being male. However, we didn't really invite Paula here to talk about the UPenn situation specifically. Rather, Paula has used her personal experience to become a national spokeswoman for how biological sex has become an issue in women's sports, not just swimming, but all different sports, and what concerns that's creating, and actually outside of sports as well. We were talking about a little bit earlier. So, Paula, welcome to the New Civil Liberties Alliance, and welcome to Wine and Cheese.
Thank you for having me.
Well, we're delighted that you're here. Maybe we could start by you could tell our audience how you first got involved in competitive swimming and how important that has been in your upbringing.
Yeah, so I first started swimming when I was 8 years old. My parents thought it was a good after-school activity for me. I didn't love it at first. Swimming pools are really cold. So being a really small, skinny kid, that was not my favorite activity.
Got cold quickly.
Oh, yeah. And my coach was always concerned because my lips were purple. But it was something I still did. And then it wasn't until my brother went off to college when I was in 6th grade that I realized I had an opportunity to do something that was my own, because my brother never did competitive swimming. So I started to focus a lot, and I didn't miss a single practice in that first month of September when my brother went off to college. And it was at that point I actually started to realize if I continued working hard, I could get recruited to college. And my mom really liked that because my mother, she's Taiwanese originally, and she's from Taiwan. Uh-huh. And so getting into a good school was something that was very important to her. And so she always viewed sports and after-school activities as extras, and academics were the focus. But when she realized if I did both, it could help me get into college, she was on board.
Yes, parents are funny that way, aren't they? Suddenly, avenues to college are definitely get you more attention from your folks.
Yes.
So at what point did it become something that wasn't just fun for you, but was something that you really cared about from a competitive standpoint? Was there a particular stroke you started doing where you got really good, or what was the...
Yeah, so when I was in 7th grade, I actually qualified for YMCA Nationals, and the age cutoff to be allowed at the meet is 12, and I was 13. So I was pretty much the youngest group of people that could even go to the meet. And I qualified in the 200-meter backstroke. And I actually hated that event. And so it was at that moment I started to realize maybe that was my best event. And that was really when I started taking it very seriously, going to these meets.
Everybody else hated it too. So.
Yes, exactly. But when I went to my first YMCA Nationals, I actually placed dead last. But it was funny because this mom on the team came up to me and she said, it's so important that you even made the meet. You're probably the youngest girl here. And she inspired me to keep going. And that mom actually raised an Olympic water polo player. Ah. Her son was an Olympian a few years later. So it really meant a lot to have a parent like that tell me that to keep going and tell me that, being there was so important. And so that's something that actually really inspired me, because a few years later when her son did make the Olympic team, I said, oh, well, I have her support, and she raised an Olympian. So it was a really cool thing because swimming actually helped me do better in school. In the weirdest way, I had to be very diligent on when I did my academic work. I had to study between study halls. I went to a high school where it was kind of spaced out. So there was a large walking time between classes. So if I had a class that was close to the previous class, in that 10-minute passing period, I would actually do some homework. And I would never have been motivated to do something like that if I didn't know I had to dedicate 3 hours after practice after school to going to practice.
Right.
So, and
being a serious athlete is a big time commitment.
Exactly. And so that was something that actually ended up helping my academics. And it was also a good, relief after school to have something you didn't have to work on your schoolwork immediately. And it was also an opportunity for me to meet kids outside of school. There's a lot of kids on my team that went to different schools in bordering towns in different parts of the area, different schools, public, private schools, you name it. So it was a good opportunity for me to also meet a diverse group of people than I would have just going to my high school.
Sure. And so then you were recruited to the University of Pennsylvania, which is, I think, where your brother went as well, but he wasn't an athlete, I gather.
Yeah, so my brother got into University of Pennsylvania into this really prestigious dual degree program, 25 people per year get into. And so he was very academically driven, but for me, I wasn't as academically top scoring. I didn't take as many AP classes as him. I didn't take as challenging courses. So it was really a combination of doing well in school, but also having swimming that was able to get me into the same school, but in my own way. And so that was what was really important to me, to do a similar thing, but to do it with the sports that he didn't do.
And so when you started in the fall of 2018?
Yes.
So that would have been pre-COVID.
Yes.
And so how was it when you got to campus?
What
was the team like?
Yeah, the team was normal. It was pretty challenging though for me because I wanted to study engineering, and that was really challenging because a lot of the professors didn't have a lot of athletes, so they were not very understanding with the schoolwork. So I failed 3 math quizzes my freshman fall because I wasn't able to be there for practice, and they weren't willing to do exemptions. So that was something I found really, really challenging in college, is that a lot of professors were not that accommodating to athletes. And it wasn't just in the engineering school. This was common across many different disciplines. That was something that I think a lot of athletes in the Ivy League in particular struggled with.
Yeah, I can imagine that would be difficult. When did you first? When Lia first joined the UPenn team, was that pre-COVID or that was right after COVID? When did that happen?
So Lia, or when I joined the Penn team, it was someone named Will. And actually, I met Lia Thomas on my recruiting trip when I was a senior in high school. So I knew who Will was in the fall of 2017. Okay.
And when the teams compete at meets, do you go together? The women's team and the men's team go together to meets. Is that
Yes.
Is that right? Okay.
So not every school is like this, but the University of Pennsylvania is a combined program. And what that means is we have the same head coach on both the men's team and the women's team. And meaning we also practice together, we go to meets together when applicable. There's a few meets that we do separately, but mostly it's combined travel, and we spend a lot of time with the men's team.
And do your scores count? Is there like a men's score and a women's score? Or does the whole team score count together for the team portion of the meet?
The scores are separated because it is, again, you're only competing for your women's team, for your men's team. There are a few meets that do give combined scores, but again, it's still our men's team will win against a certain school and we'll lose against them, or vice versa.
Okay.
So the scores are not combined, but the programs, the way we're running it, the budgeting is also, I think, combined. We all kind of ordered the same gear together and all that. Those logistics.
And were you still doing the backstroke, or were you doing?
Yes, I was. I was still my event through college. But yeah, so in fall of 2019, we had a team meeting, and it was really interesting because the men's team had their meeting before ours, and most of the time, if our coach has an announcement for us, he's telling both the teams. And so the men have their meeting, and we're waiting to have our meeting, and then our coach calls us out, and I noticed that there's this men's team member, Lia Thomas, who's hanging back. And I said, I wonder why he's still here. And our coach comes over to start the meeting, and he says, Will, this is your meeting. And I said, why is a men's team member running a women's team meeting? And he announces to us that he's transgender and is going to be transitioning to the women's team. So this was in the fall of 2019. Will was a year older than me, so I was a sophomore. Will was a junior, and said that he was going to be transitioning to the women's team the next year. So this is right before COVID. So COVID happens in the spring of 2020, and then the Ivy League proceeds to cancel all athletic competition from 2020 to 2021. And Will was supposed to graduate in 2021. Okay. But at this point, opted to take a gap year so that he could, compete on the women's team the next year. So that was my senior year, the fall of 2021, and Will's senior year as well, having taken a gap year. So that's when Thomas started competing for the women's team.
Okay. And were there concerns expressed to coaches or administrators maybe at that first meeting, or maybe not until later when the competitions happened? And did anyone say they were uncomfortable with the locker room situation, for example?
Yeah. So interestingly, the first concern girls brought up was, okay, how is this going to work with the locker room? So we were told Thomas was going to be changing in a family room, locker room in the hallway that was separated, or would be continuing to change in the men's room. So Thomas makes this announcement in the fall of 2019 that he wants to transition to the women's team, right? He's still a member of the men's team at this point because he needs to wait that year out. So he's still changing in the men's room, but says, please refer to me using she, her pronouns, but he's still a member of the men's team and is still changing in the men's locker room. So it was a very interesting situation where we were like, okay, it'll be fine. And then once, 2 years had passed and we lost a year for COVID, in the fall of 2021, there was never another conversation about it. Will was just magically allowed to be in our locker room as Lia and no questions asked.
And were there concerns at that point raised to coaches or administrators?
Yeah, one of my close friends on the team, she actually got the locker next to Lia, and she expressed concerns, and our coach just said, I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do about it. And so this girl, she changed in the family locker room alone in the hallway for half the season, and the other half of the season she opted to change in a bathroom stall. And I didn't even really process that she did that the entire season, but I remember I would see her, kind of tiptoeing over to the bathroom stall to change in privacy because she was uncomfortable the entire season, and no one ever did anything about it. No one ever asked her how she felt. No one offered to maybe move her locker or ask her if there was something that could be done. It was she had to make her own decision to isolate herself in order to feel comfortable.
Right. Were there any concerns raised about the fairness of having someone on the team? Did the team do better with Lia on the team than the team had done before?
We placed the highest in the Ivy League championship we've ever placed. And we also placed the highest in the NCAA championship we've ever placed. And again, Lia was the only person who scored points at that meet. So I think we placed top 25 in the NCAAs, which is unheard of. And also those points came from one singular person who shouldn't have even been allowed to compete.
And were there concerns expressed by people on the team about that? Like, this is not fair to the other women either in the other Ivy League teams you were competing against or the other NCAA teams you were competing against?
Everyone raised, not everyone, I can't speak for everyone, but many people raised varying concerns. Girls who swam the same event as Thomas said, am I going to be bumped out of a relay? Am I going to be bumped out of my spot? There were different levels of concern. Some people were just concerned about the overall fairness. Some people were concerned about if our team actually broke a few of our own team records that year with Lia on relays. So people were saying, oh, am I a part of a relay that shouldn't even count anymore? So some of those girls on that relay were concerned. There's a lot of people who were concerned about different aspects of it. And overall, every time you'd go to express these concerns, our coaches would just say, there's nothing we can do. Our hands are tied.
By whom? By whom were the hands tied? By administrators, or did they ever say?
So the athletic department constantly tried to control the narrative. They would put out statements saying our team is supportive. They would try to paint the picture that the University of Pennsylvania swim team was this wonderful, inclusive, progressive place. And I remember actually, so Riley Gaines is now a good friend of mine. When I first reached out to her, she told me that she was surprised because she was under the impression that the entire team was completely supportive of the situation. And that's part of the reason why I went out of my way to message her.
She swam for the University of Kentucky, I believe. Is that right? Okay.
Yeah. And she's been the most vocal advocate for this cause. And she was very surprised when I reached out to her because, right, everyone in the media really thought that this team was so supportive of it. And in reality, of course, there were girls who supported it. And there were girls like myself and a lot of my good friends that didn't support it. But the hardest thing that happened is the university tried to control the narrative, and they sent in administrators to talk to us about the situation.
And what did those administrators say?
Yes. They told us there's nothing you can do about it, so you might as well stop complaining about it. They advised us not to go to the media. They said the media is not your friend. And they also told us that if we put our name behind our feelings about this, it'll follow us for the rest of our lives, and we'll be on the wrong side of history.
That sounds like a threat.
Yeah, and they told us point blank, you will regret doing this. Like, you will regret speaking about it. And they also proposed to us to seek psychological counseling if we still objected.
Yeah, I want to come back to that. But I think I read that you had already gone to the media before this had happened, right?
Yeah, it was. So I was in one of those people who said, okay, maybe it's not me. Maybe I should not be the one who comes forward about this. But I knew that it was wrong. And so my first step was, okay, let me just clarify this media, because the media at this point, right, had thought everyone on the team was completely supportive of it. So I said, okay, if I just put something out there anonymously and just let them know that there's at least one girl on the team that objects, it'll open the conversation up because people will say, okay, there's one girl on the Penn team that at least is questioning this. And I just knew that would promote conversation, which was my biggest goal. So I had already gone.
So you were hoping to start a conversation by anonymously having something in the press, thinking that then, okay, well, let's open this up to a wider conversation.
Yeah, and I had done that. And then that's when they had this team meeting. And at this point, there were girls who objected to the situation that refused to talk about it any longer because the school had told us essentially, they mentioned that we'd have a hard time getting a job. And at an Ivy League school, you can't tell a bunch of 20-something-year-olds they're not going to get a job. That's like the biggest fear you have. And sure. I had the same concerns. I knew that my parents would kill me if I didn't have a job after college. That's why you go someplace
like the University of Pennsylvania is to get a good job, right? I mean,
that's the idea. And so that was something that was very challenging for me. And it actually shut down conversation even one-on-one. There were girls even the week before, there was one of my teammates I would talk to in class. And then she went from talking about how she disagreed strongly with the situation to, how dare you even speak about this? You're a transphobe. You're a horrible person. So there was a lot of people's opinions that, what they said out loud was different than what they thought on the inside because of fear, because they didn't want to be caught up with the people who disagreed. They didn't want to lose that job. They didn't want to be that person who was going to have their entire lives changed by having their opinion out there on the topic.
So what did your original article say?
It was an interview with Outkick, and this caused a lot of controversy on people.
Is that a swimming magazine?
No, it's a sports group. And believe it or not, I hate admitting this now, but I was trying to track down anyone who was writing an article about mentioning the fact that Lia previously competed for the men's team. And I messaged a bunch of reporters. Only one got back to me. It was this writer named Joe from Outkick. And I'm actually friends with the people at Outkick now, so it's something we look back on and kind of laugh about. And he asked me some questions. I also made him cut a few lines out that I thought were too sensitive, particularly discussing the fact that Lia had male genitalia. I didn't think that was appropriate. Obviously, now the entire world knows that. And, they wrote this article, and it was very, very calm. There wasn't anything controversial. I was just saying that it was an unfair situation. I clarified that we've known since 2019. It was just clearing up things that people in the media had questions about. And this came out 2 days after our team meeting. So
you're sitting in the team meeting knowing you've already had this interview, but it hasn't come out yet. Were you concerned? Were you scared? Did you think about trying to pull it back maybe?
I thought about it, but at that point I was like, what's done is done. I was still very firm in what I believed. I knew I was on the right side of it, whether or not they agreed with that. But the problem is I told a few teammates that I was doing it. And after this meeting, it kind of turned into a witch hunt of you want to call out the people who are against it and you want to make them feel isolated. So what happened was I told a few girls and I told a few of the wrong girls. And then they told everyone. And before I knew it, text messages that I had sent privately to somebody was being screenshot and sent around the entire team. And I received text messages from multiple different teammates telling me I was a horrible person, calling me transphobic. One of them suggested that I was contributing to trans people committing suicide. And a lot of my teammates blocked me. I had teammates not want to share lanes with me. I had teammates refuse to speak to me. And that turned into a really challenging time when I didn't even think I was doing anything that was so wrong. And it was really isolating. And I lost a lot of people who I'd previously considered close friends over the situation. And it was really, really, really challenging to see so many people refuse to talk to me, but Lia still had, all the same friends.
Sure. Was there anybody on the team who maybe secretly was saying, thank you for speaking out. I wasn't brave enough to do that, but I appreciate you're doing it, or anything like that?
Yeah, so there's this one girl who I knew agreed with me, and so we had a team meeting to talk about what happened with the media, and it just turned into everyone just, pointing their finger at me, being like, why'd you do this? You're horrible. And this one girl was, very mild in the meeting. But she said, the wrong thing to do is speak out. We should just keep this in-house and contained. And she quickly actually changed her opinion on it mid-season, but never told me that she changed her opinion on maybe we should go to the media, maybe we should speak about it. And now that I'm public, she was one of the people always on my mind that I thought about. She's reached out to me. We're really close now. She's super supportive. She wants to speak out, but she, is very concerned about the job that she has. And that's everyone's concern, is that if you speak out about this, you're going to lose your job. And so a few of my teammates have reached out and been supportive. Limited number, but yes.
So let's go back to something you said before, which was that the school offered psychological counseling or services to the teammates as part of this meeting. What was anybody asking for that? I mean, why was the school offering counseling to folks who might have a concern about having someone of the opposite sex on the women's team?
Yeah, so in this meeting, they brought a whole panel of people. They brought a few representatives from the athletic department. They brought people from the LGBT center. They brought another person who I'm not really sure what their role was, but it's like an internal conflict counselor. I don't know what the official title was. And then they also brought a representative from psychological services. And I thought that was interesting because psychological services at Penn is notoriously bad. It takes weeks to get an appointment. Prior to any of this happening, the head of the department committed suicide over his job being too stressful.
Oof.
So it has a really bad rep. Nobody who actually has an issue would go to CAPS because they would seek a private counselor before going to the school one. I've never heard anyone who actually went having a good experience with it. So that's why I was like, okay, why are they here? But the reason that they were there is they said the exact quote, there's nothing you guys can do about the situation. We're here to support you in any way so that you're okay with the situation. They said that. We're here to make you okay with the situation. Here is psychological services. And I was saying, okay, so you're telling me I need therapy and I need to change the way my brain works and change the way I think and how I'm approaching.
And I can't talk publicly about it with the media.
Yeah, so that one was a crazy step. I think they definitely should have gone without bringing psychological services. I think everyone else there, I could see why they were there. I could see why the LGBT representative was there to tell us about how inclusion in sports is important. While I don't think it's necessary, I understand why they were there. But psychological services I thought was a crazy step. And nobody took them up on it, as far as I know.
What about the free speech aspect of this? I mean, to me, putting aside the particular issue or putting aside the context of the swim team, why would any university tell students that you're not allowed to go talk to the media about something that you want to go talk to the media about? Were you ever told that by any other administrator about any other topic?
No, and again, I think they want to control the narrative. Ultimately, they can't stop you, but giving you enough incentive, saying you're not going to get a job, right? Saying, and even just the social pressure. If any of my teammates saw, again, I'd already gone to the media, it was done, right. And every single one of my teammates saw what happened to me. Not a single one of them was ever going to go to the media. And there was another girl who was also doing anonymous interviews simultaneously, and people figured it out, and she also faced scrutiny for it. She's not out about it publicly, but it's really challenging. No one else who was maybe willing to speak about it wanted to come forward because the scrutiny, because the public perception. People also don't know if their professors might find out that they're speaking about this and then grade them down.
What are the people who don't want, so I understand the university may want to control the narrative, but what about the people who genuinely have a different point of view on the issue from your point of view? Why don't they want to engage in conversations about the topic?
It's a fear of being canceled. I think that's the biggest thing. I was actually a head TA, and I had a close relationship with these professors I TA'd for, and they're from the two professors I TA'd for are from India. They're not American, and I talked to one of them about the issue, and he said, I think the situation is ridiculous, but also what can we do? He said, this is a school, we should just learn. We should focus on our academics. We shouldn't get involved in social issues or political issues. That was his perception, and I completely understand that. And I think a lot of people who maybe disagreed with it were under that, like, okay, but this is school. I'm here to learn about my degree, whatever that might be. I'm not here to get involved in a national scandal.
But you're out of school now. You've been out of school over a year. Are people more willing to engage in conversations with you now that it's not in the academic context? Or do you find that this isn't a topic that folks necessarily want to have conversations about?
Yeah, I'm surprised by the attention or lack thereof in this. People on the right side of the aisle are very open to discussion on this, but people on the left are not. And it's very interesting because I'll talk to people that are left-leaning, and they'll tell me that they agree that men cannot compete in women's sports, that men can't magically take the place of women. But they also don't want to talk to me about it because I have allies that are traditionally conservative or Republican. And that's something that people can't really get around. And I have a lot of people that this is such a huge issue for them, but they're, how dare you say you'd vote for a Republican? That's horrible. And I said, oh, well, but this issue is what I want. And this issue is what I need support on. This issue is what I need people to vote for. And they said, how dare you ask me that? So it's very interesting where people aren't willing to look over what the actual policies are. They're more just picking candidates based on what they think sounds good. There's a lot of emotional people saying that Democrats are the more, votable party, even if the policies that they're actually pushing out don't help them.
Well, focusing a little bit on the legal side of this, I know you're not a lawyer, but we're a law firm here, so I'll try to focus on that a little bit. So Title IX is the law that guarantees that women would have equal opportunities to participate in educational experiences, including athletics in high school and college. And the language of Title IX is pretty straightforward. It states, no person in the United States on the basis of sex, or shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. So I guess my question to you is, are women being excluded from participation in women's sports as a result of allowing biological men to occupy spots on those teams?
Absolutely. I know. So in my personal experience on my swim team, swimming is a limited roster sport. So we have, almost 40 girls on the team, but to travel meets, we can only take 26 girls. Every single meet that Lia Thomas attended, a biological girl, woman, whatever you want to call them, was left off the bus and was denied that opportunity to go compete for our school, but also the opportunity to go best time in those events, to compete in those events, to have the experience and opportunity to compete. And that's just on this experience. Now they're allowing people to do this in high school. And so at this point, college coaches might start favoring transgender women to recruit over real women. And that is going to deny girls from scholarships, from opportunities to attend better schools than they might otherwise go to. Absolutely, this is a violation of Title IX, in my opinion. Again, I'm no lawyer. And I know that they're looking and potentially rewriting Title IX. I know that's been a discussion. I know they haven't decided that yet. And I think they actually delayed the announcement.
Yeah, there's a rule that the Department of Education is working on that I don't think has come out yet, but I'm sure will sometime soon.
Yes, and I've heard many rumors about what that might say. And there have been brief discussions I've heard that they want to basically redefine Title IX and say that it's for people who identify as a woman, which is completely contradictory to what it originally stood for when it was passed 51 and a half years ago, whatever the exact number is now.
Yeah, 1972. So, and I think when we talk about something like the 1999 Women's World Cup, the U.S. women's soccer team, they talked about it as sort of the Title IX triumph because all these women were of an age where they grew up playing sports all the way from very young up until they were world champions in the sport. Are you concerned that there are women who won't even pick up sports at younger ages as a result of the trends that we're seeing now?
Absolutely. That's something that's part of the reason why I'm doing everything that I'm doing is I think about myself as a middle schooler or high schooler. If I had been bumped out of a spot in a meet or a spot on a relay by someone who is a male identifying as a woman, I would have maybe been so discouraged I'd quit. And I imagine there's girls who are doing that. There have been a few cases where I think it was a professional cyclist, said, all these men are taking my spot, like, well, what's the point? And they quit their professional sport. And that's a career. That's a livelihood. You make money off of professional sports, at least you're supposed to. And it's just discouraging women all around. And I think there's some stat that says most female CEOs, I don't know what the exact percentage is, I think it's higher than 75, played a sport competitively. And it's something it's needed. It was a great relief for me. I couldn't have gotten into Penn without swimming. I couldn't have actually even done any of my academic accomplishments without swimming. I think most girls who played a sport do it. And even if you don't play a sport, it's still a part of your life. You've done it at some point, and you have the right to fair competition, but also safe competition. Playing against men is really, really dangerous in many instances.
Yeah, swimming isn't even a contact sport,
No.
but there are transgender athletes playing in contact sports against women.
Yeah, and the biggest example is Peyton McNabb. She's now a close friend of mine. She's a freshman in college now, but when she was a senior in high school, a male player on the opposing team in volleyball spiked a ball into her head and knocked her out unconscious. And she's actually still suffering from injuries. She has partial paralysis from the injuries. And that was actually one of my points where I said, okay, maybe I should speak about this publicly, because that's the bigger fear, right? In swimming, I'm okay because we're not being physically hurt by males. But in contact sports, this is a really, really big deal. And if people can't see the discrepancy in allowing that, I don't know like what image helps them understand how it's not fair and fairness, and it's also not safe.
And what do people on the other side of the issue say to you when you make these points? What do they say in response?
Yeah, a lot of people have said maybe the best solution is to allow everyone to identify however they want as a kid, but in professional competition, we should make sure it's sex segregated. That's something that they've tried to concede on, and I think again that does not work, because younger girls are going to be discouraged and then they won't even get to the professional level. So how does that help them? And it's also unfair to say that only professional athletes allow fair competition, that fairness doesn't matter in grassroots level sports. Of course it does. Fairness matters in all competition. So that's an argument I've seen. Another argument is it's not bothering anyone. Let them identify however they want. I can speak from personal experience that there were hundreds of girls affected by Lia Thomas being allowed to compete in NCAA swimming. Every single girl at that NCAA meet was affected. Whether it was exactly how Riley was affected in terms of losing her trophy, maybe not to that extent, but having to undress in the same locker room as a male, the distraction of the media attention of the meet. Nobody's ever followed NCAA swimming before this. I know all the girls in the Ivy League were affected by this. Lia Thomas actually won High Point Women's Swimmer of the Meet at the Ivy League Championship. Many girls could have been in contention for winning that. They did not. And the distraction of having to race Lia Thomas. I personally know a girl who was bumped out of the A final at the Ivy League Championship when Lia Thomas was competing, and that affected her mentally a lot because she could have been top 8 and she had to place 9th. There's hundreds of girls affected by just one athlete. And so if we think about continually allowing transgender women to compete in sports, in all the different sports, from elementary school, middle school, high school, college, professional, there's so many different categories. This is affecting many, many women.
And I would think, I mean, you tell me, but if there are women at the college level who are concerned about changing in a locker room in college, I would think that would be even more true at the high school or junior high level when maybe folks aren't as mature or don't have as much self-confidence or whatever the case might be.
Yeah, and that's an argument I make all the time. While it was incredibly uncomfortable for me to go through that, and again, we changed with Lia 18 times every week. It was a lot. I'm an adult. I know how to handle myself. I know how to cover get in the corner and cover myself up with the towel. I knew the situation I was in, but I can't imagine thinking young kids who don't necessarily know that, who aren't comfortable with their body, who don't want to know about what the other sex's body looks like, who don't need to be exposed to that. And that's something...
Just to compete in sports.
Exactly. And that's what people are saying, well, you just should deal with it to get the opportunity to compete. And that's something I even told myself, and I know my teammates did, is we're privileged to be here. We're lucky to be on this team. We'll deal with the situation because we want to be on the team so badly. You shouldn't have to compromise being comfortable just to have the opportunity to compete. You should be allowed to feel comfortable at every aspect of your changing, your competition, and it shouldn't just be part of the package of getting the opportunity to do something you want to do.
One of the things that NCLA focuses on is how some of these decisions are made. And it seems to me that regardless of what side of the issue one is on, these decisions aren't being made democratically. I mean, at least I can't think of an example of a state legislature that's voted to require this. Maybe there are some that could be. But at the federal level in particular, Congress hasn't voted on this. It's been the Department of Education or other bureaucracies that have made these decisions. Is that something that that you think about at Independent Women's Forum, or is that an issue that folks talk about when you visit with them, that, hey, this is something that ought to be made in a democratic process?
Yeah, that's actually been one of the biggest things I've been talking about originally is there was no room to have a conversation. I've always said, I don't mind being wrong. Why can't we talk about it? Why can't we have this discussion and say what's fair for everyone? My biggest thing was in the situation, we were only concerned about Lia's feelings. What about the feelings of all the girls that had to compete to Lia? Why can't we all have an open conversation and have the policymakers at the NCAA think about, what this means for everyone? It's only about the inclusion of this one group of people. And that's something I had a really hard time getting past, because I said there's no conversation. There was no room for us to come to a fair solution for everyone involved. And again, leaving it to the NCAA, who's this biased organization that wants to promote inclusivity and progress, whatever that means to them, how is that in the right for everybody else?
Yeah. I wanted to come back to the free speech aspect of this, because we were talking about kind of the school and how some of these things weren't how the school was handling them. But it seems to me that this is a conversation that, even aside from what's happening in school, that there's a compelled speech aspect to this too, that maybe folks who certainly in a school environment, there's maybe an enforced silence. If everybody's being said you can't talk about this, then you're maybe implicitly being asked to endorse something that you might or might not agree with. But let me make that a question. Did you feel that this sort of enforced silence was forcing you to endorse what was happening at your school?
Yeah, because if no one on the team comments on it, everyone can assume that the statements the university has put out on our behalf is what we agree with.
Because they weren't staying silent. Yeah,
they were actually plastering Lia all over their social media. You're so proud of you for winning this NCAA championship. They also nominated Lia for NCAA Woman of the Year, which was like crazy because we have so many female athletes at the school that are actual female athletes. It was just mind-boggling, honestly. But my biggest thing was I wrote an article for the school newspaper that was retracted with no notice to anyone. And
This was the Daily Pennsylvanian?
Yes, the Daily Pennsylvanian. Mm-hmm. And they had published no short of, I believe, 7 pieces that were in the pro-Lia argument. There was a bunch of transgender groups and LGBT groups and a bunch of people like that were very supportive of it. And they had no one willing to write with the opposite opinion. And I was approached by a friend who actually I knew through College Republicans, who was a writer there, and she asked me if I would be willing to do a piece. And so I did. And they still ended up, changing my speech in it. They gave me a list of rules before I wrote it. The rules said that I had to refer to Lia as she, her. I couldn't refer to transgenderism as a choice. I wasn't allowed to
but other than that, you could be on the opposite side of the issue.
Right. And then I would write sentences and then they would delete them because they said they were too offensive. And one of the sentences that was too offensive was I wrote, if we continue to let this happen, we're going to discourage future women and girls from competing in sports altogether. And they said, that's so drastic. How dare you say that? Which was very interesting. So they made a lot of edits and they cut lines out. They put in a huge paragraph at the beginning. Well, I also added this in saying, I support Lia's journey to affirm her gender identity, something along those lines. And they added all that in and they published it and immediately retracted it within 3 hours. And
even the watered down version.
It was so watered down. And I sent it to so many different people. I said, tell me what's offensive in here. And I even had very, very, very liberal friends read it. And they're like, I don't see anything wrong here. This is completely factual. It was just comparing times between Olympic winners on the men's side and the women's side. It was citing articles that talked about these studies. And it was still too offensive. And apparently what ended up happening was half the staff of the Daily Pennsylvanian threatened to quit over it being up because they said, I don't want to be a part of a transphobic organization, is what they said, which was, the article wasn't transphobic. I don't understand what in it could have been construed that way, but that's what their statement was, so they had to pull it down.
So this was this was an article where you were making a factual point that there were problems from a competitive basis in having athletes that were biologically male compete against women in the same sport.
Yes,
that was the point.
And frankly, it's actually even scratching the surface of all of my beliefs on the issue. I mean, now that I'm not binded by my university, I speak about this all the time. And if I even wrote that article now as an op-ed, I think people on my side would say, "Wow, like you're actually not even being that effective for your point." Like I would be called out by my own supporters on why are you writing something so soft and so silly?
Milquetoast. Yeah. How is the conversation going now? Is there something recently that's happened to try to discourage you from continuing to speak out against depriving women athletes from having women's sports reserved for women?
I mean, we have a lot of critics. There's a lot of different people that leave hate comments. Riley and I laugh at them.
Keith Olbermann.
Yes.
Just to name one.
Yeah, and that's a big argument is people constantly just like post stats and say, oh, you and Riley are losers. Riley is really funny because she'll actually like these comments. Like things will show up in my feed and it'll say like, you're such a terrible loser, swim faster next time. And it'll be like liked by Riley Gaines. And I'll just say, so it's pretty funny. And we occasionally screenshot some trolls that say things. And there's people that I think might just do it just because they love being internet trolls and they probably do it to like 40 other people. But there's also people who just think that if you don't accept someone who identifies as a woman in every single part of society, that you're a horrible person. People have accused me of contributing to transgender genocide. I don't know what that is precisely. But it is challenging, but it's also, I'm at the point now where I know where my supporters are. I know who to turn to when I'm feeling down. Riley obviously is a really good friend of mine and we talk a lot about it. And obviously we're doing very similar work. So it's been helpful to have her. And just in general, the people who are against this have never had any real criticism. People just call me a bigot. They call me transphobic. I've been called racist, which is really interesting because I'm Asian and the people who are telling me that I'm racist are full white. So I find that really confusing. But as soon as I see one of those words, I just know that there's no true criticism in it. As soon as they mention one of those buzzwords, transphobic, bigot, racism, homophobic, things like that, and then there's no real substance to the criticism. Again, I'm happy to be criticized if there's constructive criticism, if there's feedback that warrants a conversation, or if there's a back and forth, or if they're willing to debate it. Of course, I've always been open to those types of conversations, but from what I'm seeing from the people against this, I haven't seen any of that.
Where do you think we go from here, both on this issue and in terms of free speech and civil discourse about controversial issues? Where do you, as someone who's just gotten out of college a year ago, where do you think society's headed?
It's definitely scary a little bit. I haven't lost hope completely because there's still many people who I'm willing to talk to and people who are willing to listen. I think we're getting better. I think this issue is turning a lot of people because I can see that I know there's a lot of Democrats that support this. And something I'll share that's really positive is we actually have very close family friends. So I'm from Connecticut. Everyone I know is pretty liberal. They actually emailed my mom because they're very supportive of me, and they describe themselves as politically homeless, meaning that they used to be diehard Democrats and now they're seeing what happened. They actually lived in California in the San Francisco area and they saw what happened in San Francisco with extreme Democratic policies allowing, criminals to run free and many stores having to close down because it's just not sustainable to have everyone robbing you. And they're now describing themselves as no longer Democrats, which is encouraging me that people are starting to open up that maybe we need to have a conversation about what these policies are actually doing. And maybe we have to think these things through. And again, nothing against people who support Democratic policies, but you can't let it get to an extreme. And allowing men to compete in women's sports is an example of a Democratic policy being allowed to go to the extreme.
It's pretty extreme. And what do you hope to gain by continuing to be out there talking about these issues? How do you define success in your mission here?
Yeah, I think success is allowing in all 50 states for women and girls to be protected, not just in their sports, but in their bathrooms, in their locker rooms, in women's shelters, even in women's prisons. People are like, I don't care about the prisoners. I think it should matter. I think you go to prison to do time for your crime, not to be subjected to violent males that might harm you. In those spaces, I think you should be allowed those protections at the very least. I won't stop until we're done with all 50 states. And we're going state by state in state legislatures right now.
With a democratic process.
Yes, exactly. And they vote on those things, and that's exactly what we want. And unfortunately, there wouldn't be an option for a federal one because I know this current administration won't support it. Maybe one day they might, or even I would be okay if a Democrat wanted to sign it. I'm nothing against them, but from what I'm seeing from the current administration, they're not willing to sign something on the federal level to protect women and girls. So we're going to have to go to the states. And there are some Democrats on the state levels that are willing to vote for this. So we can only hope that they might be brave and vote against their party on these issues, and some have. So I'm hoping to continue to see that.
Well, thank you very much for coming to Wine and Cheese today. I hope that folks have tuned in and have had an opportunity to learn a little bit more about this issue and how it's affecting women athletes at the college level and beyond. Would all of you join me in thanking Paula Scanlan for joining us on Wine and Cheese?